Shalaco here. I'm in Wisconsin visiting family, and it's a winter wonderland here. I'm really excited to go fly my drone and get some amazing winter aerial shots. This week is going to be a little bit different. Usually I go on adventures and I take you guys along. I also hope that this can be a place where I can share some of my filmmaking and photography experience with you guys and hopefully learn from you guys too. So if that's not your thing, it's cool. Come back next week and I'll have something new for you. If it is, here we go. Alright guys, so here we are with some winter flying tips for your drone. I fly a Mavic Pro, but these will work for most of your drones out there. So before I came out here, I did a bunch of research. I'm going to share some of the tips that I read as well as my experiences so that you can learn from those. First thing is warmth. Warm drone, warm battery, warm pilot, warm fingers, touchscreen gloves, lick them if they're not quite working, and a warm phone. Your biggest risk of flying in cold or sub-zero conditions is a voltage drop, which will cause your drone to shut off immediately without warning. That's no good. So if you've ever had a cell phone just die suddenly while it still seemed to have a charge on it, you know what I'm talking about. It's just like that, but with a drone. You can check in the DJI app. So if you click the battery icon on the home screen, you can see the voltage as well as the temperature if you want it to be at least 40 degrees Fahrenheit. And while we're here, we can go ahead and turn on the voltage on main screen. This way you can keep an eye on your voltage from the home screen. The biggest risk of flying your drone in winter or cold conditions, sub-zero, is a voltage drop where your aircraft suddenly drops from the sky when it immediately turns off. You're also going to want to keep your drone dry, so consider doing hand launches and hand catches. So that you don't have to launch from the wet ground or the snow. The cold, I've heard, drains batteries faster, and people have recommended flying for no more than 15 minutes. I have actually experienced that the cold, dense air gives me a longer flight time. I've actually flown for 20 minutes at 34 degrees. At 22 degrees, I did experience a reduced battery and had a 17-minute flight time. So you'll want to go on shorter flights. Give yourself extra return to home time. Couldn't hurt. However, I always push it and go, you know, maybe I'm 1,000 meters out and I wait till my battery's at 8 minutes and then I bring it home, and I'm always landing right when it's starting to give me the low battery beep warning. The thing you want to watch there is that return to home doesn't kick in and send you to, because I'm in a forest, I have my return to home set at 300 feet. And when your return to home kicks in and you fly to return to home height, that it automatically revs the engine or drains the battery unnecessarily. Once you take off, you're going to want to hover for 1 minute. Don't just take off right away. Hover for a minute so you can see how it flies, how it's performing. Is it flying normally, or is it acting erroneously? If it's not acting how you'd expect it to, obviously it's not good conditions to fly and you should land it. Try again some other day. Take off, hover for a minute, and then just make sure that it's behaving normally. Maybe operate the gimbal controls to see how responsive your feet is and how well the aircraft's responding. Now you're not going to want to make any sudden moves, because if you ramp up those RPMs and you drain that battery down, that's when you might have a voltage drop. So you're going to want to be real feathery on the controls. Now this goes for the camera as well. I experienced when changing between modes, as well as changing from the portrait camera to the landscape camera, that I would have longer drops in the feed. It almost seemed like the camera was rebooting, where everything went black and then the whites faded in and the blacks faded in. That made me a little nervous, so at that point I brought it back in and landed. So just keep an eye on how responsive it is. If it starts to get sluggish, you're just going to want to reduce your risks. Since there's snow, it's going to be a lot brighter. Unless it's sunrise or sunset, you'll want an ND filter on. I I found in my flights an N8 gets me an F50 for that nice cinematic footage. Speaking of the lens, you may experience some misting, some moisture condensing right in the center of your lens. I've heard people recommend putting it back in the bag and letting it adjust to the temperature. I actually just fly it for a minute or two, maybe take it out a little bit, and it'll adjust to the temperatures. I've flown in very, very light snow. You obviously want to avoid moisture as much as possible. I've heard that flying in light snow is okay, but not to fly in moderate snow. You're going to want to turn off sensory avoidance, because those obstacle sensors are just going to be confused in the snow. So unless you want to deal with sudden stops or swerving, it's probably just better to turn that off. I've been flying over rivers and snow patches. When you're flying over rivers of snow, especially at a low altitude, say 10 feet, that you get some downward drift. The downward sensors get a little bit confused when there's not like a nice texture. When you're flying over something that's even and white, it has a hard time gauging, and you may get some downward or upward drift. So it's good to just keep an eye on that height and just correct as necessary. So those height and distance sensors, I treat as best guesses. They're usually like 80 to 90% of the time, they're pretty accurate, but I wouldn't bet my drone on it. Especially with the height sensor, I just use those as guidelines. I wouldn't like bet my aircraft that they're 100% accurate. So for weather apps, I love Wonderground and Dark Sky. What's really cool about Weather Underground is you can set smart forecasts. So I've programmed one for flying drones. So it will show you with colored lines when the conditions are met, when acceptable and ideal conditions are met. So I set mine for 0 to 60 miles an hour for wind speed, with an ideal of 0 to 5 miles an hour. It could probably even be 10 miles an hour for when it's really still out. No precipitation, obviously, for rain. And then it gives me this cool little graph that shows me what the flying conditions are. Alright guys, those are my tips for flying in the winter. Hopefully those helped you out. If you have any tips I missed, or if you've had different experiences, please share in the comments below. You can check out my photos on Instagram, ding! And I'd love to see yours too, so please tag me so I can check out what you've shot, and safe flying and enjoy your winter holidays.